World of Warcraft is a game that is now over 20 years old, and the modern game today, in comparison, is virtually unrecognisable. Recently, we had taken a look at the unreleased zones of classic WoW. Today, we're heading back once again to check out the abilities that never made it to release. So strap in, grab yourself a snack, and let's rewind time way back to the patch of 0.5.3 as we're about to explore the abilities of the alpha version of World of Warcraft. Now, just before we get into it, I need to mention that the abilities in this patch only went up to level 40. It was still very incomplete, and some of the abilities on here were later implemented into future expansions, but it's still fun to look at what could have been in a vanilla setting. We also won't cover every single minor spell change. We will focus more on full abilities that never released, or abilities that did release but in quite a different state. So let's first start it off with the talent system, because the talent system was nothing like the one we're used to. Instead of having talents that were aimed at specific specs, everyone had access to very similar talents. This system worked very similarly to training a hunter's pet, where you would have talent points and spend them on boosting your character's base stats, resistances, defenses, and so on. You get the picture. There was a part of me that really would have liked this alongside the talent trees that we got because it could have made for some really cool customizations. At this point, there wasn't really many racials just yet. Some races had their typical resistances, dwarfs had fine treasure, undeads had their underwater breathing and broken version of Will of the Forsaken. But there was one racial here that was created that definitely never saw it through to release, and that was the Tauren racial called Bull Rush. Instant cast, 5-minute cooldown, greatly increases the running speed for 30 seconds. And when it says greatly increases, it's not messing around. Because I have no clue what percent increase this is, but I don't think I've ever really witnessed a Tauren sprint around quite like this before. It's got to be along the lines of 100% or so, and the fact that it's 30 seconds is insane. This would have no doubt been absolutely broken. But now let's move on to actual class abilities and start it off with the Shaman. Molten Blast hurls a molten blob of fire at the target, sort of like an early version of Lava Burst. Lightning Storm blasts all targets within 8 yards with bolts of lightning, dealing damage and then dealing more damage over time while channeling. This is basically the Druid ability Hurricane. Another ability that got stolen from Shamans was Thunderclap. As we all know, warriors ended up getting this ability, but it definitely made sense why it was at first a Shaman spell. Nature damage as well as the idea of being able to tank. Ghost Wolf was different back then too. The tooltip says it can be used on friendly targets, and it doesn't say how much of a speed increase Ghost Wolf gives, but it feels like it's a lot faster, along the lines of 60% probably. They also had a spell called Shock, which was an instant lightning attack. This was before they created Frost, Fire and Nature Shocks though. And here's a big one, a spell called Ethereal Form. Makes a friendly target immune to physical damage but unable to melee or use physical abilities. It's literally a blessing of protection, but for Shamans. I'm guessing this was removed because they wanted stronger identities for Shamans and Paladins as a whole. As for totems, there are some here too. We have the Serpent Totem, pretty much the same as Siren Totem but looks way cooler. The totems in general actually I thought just looked way better too. Not sure why they didn't stick with this. The big totem that never got released was the Invisibility Totem. Summons an invisibility totem at the feet of the caster for 1 minute that turns nearby group members invisible. Just imagine the kind of Stranglethorn sneak attacks you could pull off with this bad boy with your party. Aside from this, Shamans also had quite a few buffs. Fire resistance, nature resistance, spirit armor, unyielding strength, just to name a few. All of these were pretty much converted from buffs into totems for the release. But that's enough of Shamans, let's talk about a real class, and that's the Paladin. There were quite a few changes to the Paladin, one of the biggest being the seal and judgment system was yet to be implemented. So seals were kind of like blessings. They were mostly 5-minute buffs like blessings we know, but there were some that never released, such as the Seal of Wrath. This was a 15-second buff causing the target's melee hits to heal themselves. Seal of Fury, a 15-second buff causing the target to generate 50% increased threat, pretty much the predecessor of Righteous Fury and can be cast on a target. And Seal of Righteousness, which was a 1-minute buff to consecrate the target's weapon to deal extra holy damage to undeads. These shorter seals did replace the 5-minute buffs, and my god would it have been tedious to keep on top of these, especially the 50% increased threat that you'd have to spam on tanks. Hammer of Justice was called Fist of Justice, and at the low level of only 34, you'd already have access to a stun that lasts for 8 seconds. Judgment was in the game, but it was instead basically an instant cast Holy Wrath. There was a healing aura, increases the health regeneration of the party but only works out of combat. Honestly, this sounds complete ass. Resistance aura though was excellent, as it flat out increased all resistances rather than just one. Divine Shield lasted longer, had no penalty, and only a 2-minute cooldown. People cry about Bubbling Classic, just imagine this version. Paladins had 2 resurrects in the alpha. The first one was called Resurrection and basically served as the same purpose as the one we got today. And there was another one called Redemption, which is an hour-long cooldown, but resurrected the target with 100% mana and health. Paladins also had access to Crusader Strike. The Retribution dream that never got to be. It was a lot different though, as it increased the holy damage taken by the target, stacking up to 5 times. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is how the Crusader Strike debuff worked from the mobs in Scarlet Monastery. And lastly, we have Holy Strike. Your next melee attack deals a burst of holy damage, similar to how Heroic Strike works, and it would convert the entire damage from the swing into holy damage. Talking about Heroic Strike, let's move on to the Warrior. Now, honestly, Warrior is pretty much the same. It had some abilities that were called different things, such as Sundering Strike for Sunder Armor, Punishing Blow instead of Mocking Blow, with a little change that you had to be behind the target, and Heroic Strike was just called Strike. The only ability on here that warriors have that never made it to release was Inner Rage, a simple ability where you just instantly gain 50 rage. The stances were slightly different though in terms of how they worked and generated rage themselves. Battle stance, you would generate rage like normal when you hit and get hit. Berserker stance, you would only generate rage when you hit an enemy. And defensive stance, where you'd reduce the rage decay out of combat and only generate rage when you are hit. These stances of course sound horrible and would be absolutely terrible rage gain in nearly all aspects of the game. And lastly, another tiny change was to Battle Shout. It used to also increase the damage for range attacks as well. Now let's move on and talk about the Hunter abilities. Firstly, we need to clear up how Hunter's ranged attacks worked back then. They were more like a cast rather than a swing timer, and you'd have to manually cast shoot or other abilities to keep using your ranged attacks. As we go along, you'll see a lot of abilities that say attack speed plus X amount of seconds. For example, if your gun is 2.3 speed and an ability says plus 1 seconds, it will take 3.3 seconds to fire this shot. Hunters also used to use focus as a resource before they decided to use mana. Focus slowly regenerates by standing still, and even if you move an inch, you will lose all of your focus. Now with those points covered, let's jump into the actual abilities and start with Charm Beast. Charm's a beast for 1 minute. This basically mind controls the beast so you can control it as a pet. You couldn't use this ability however if you already had an active pet. Beast Call. Call the targeted beast that will not call for help. I honestly have no clue what this is, how it works, or even if it works on the alpha, as it seemingly does nothing. True Shot. A precise shot that deals extra damage with a cast time plus 1 second. This is probably an early version of Aimed Shot. Quick Shot. Instantly fire your weapon for increased damage. Doesn't need any focus or any cast time, but does require you to briefly stand still. Sniper Shot. Fire a long range shot at the enemy for a massive amount of increased damage. This bad boy had a 60-yard range, but it did take an attack speed plus 5 seconds to cast. Blinding Shot. Reduces the target's chance to hit by a lot, like 75% a lot, with a plus 1 second on its attack speed. Silencing Shot. Quite simple, silences the enemy. For 8 seconds. Running Shot. A shot that can be performed while running with additional damage. This was actually quite powerful because even instant shots at this time required you to be stood still. Fire Shot. Instant attack with increased damage and converts all of the damage to fire damage. This did require a reagent called Fire Tar. Explosive Shot. A shot that deals increased damage and explodes AoE. Very similar to the one that we got during Wrath of the Lich King, but it did require an explosive shell to cast. Starburst. This is basically Flare but requires an explosive shell and has a cast timer of weapon speed plus 1 second. Then we have Actual Flare, which also requires an explosive shell but it's an instant cast and only works around the hunter. Frost Shot. A shot that deals frost damage and slows the target, so kind of like a concussive shot with damage, but it's not an instant attack. And it required a Frost Vial as a reagent. Stalking. Target can always be seen even through all invisibility and stealth. Also highlights the target on the minimap, very similar to Hunter's Mark, but without the ranged attack bonus. Pathfinding. The Hunter leads the way, granting movement speed to the party, very similar to Aspect of the Pack, except it doesn't include a Daze. And lastly we have Summon Pet. It takes 10 seconds to summon your tamed pet in line with Warlock pets and has a 2-minute cooldown. So as you can see, Hunters were drastically different and I am absolutely sick of saying the word shot. I honestly don't know if I like this version or not. It would definitely suck to need this many reagents to cast common spells, that's for sure. But let's move away from the Hunter now and go on to mage abilities. Firstly we have Summon Water Elemental. Yep, the Burning Crusade Water Elemental was in the alpha. It doesn't have a pet bar though, but it would have been cool to see. Another Burning Crusade end talent tree ability is Slow. Slows the target's movement speed and attack speed. Invisibility, another Burning Crusade spell, but slightly different. 3-second cast time, no cooldown, 5-minute duration, but it can break randomly. I do wonder if they kept these abilities out of vanilla specifically for balance reasons, because they clearly thought they were good abilities, else they never would have brought them back for the Burning Crusade. Counterspell was quite a lot different and definitely pretty broken. Interrupting a spell would lock the caster out of that specific spell for an entire minute. Lastly, mages also had Sleep, which has a cast time and puts the target to sleep. This was later replaced by Polymorph. Rogue time, and oh boy, if you thought rogues had enough CC already, you are not ready to hear about the alpha version of Rogue. Trip. A kick that knocks the enemy down, deals a bit of damage, awards a combo point, has no cooldown, and can be spammed. Gouge. Basically the same, but again, has no cooldown, can be spammed. Garrote. Stuns the enemy and does damage per combo point. The stun is 10 seconds per combo point. But at least it's a channel, I guess. Blizzard balanced to a T. Sap also awarded 2 combo points. Sprint lasted much longer for 30 seconds. Evasion though did make it to where you couldn't attack, similarly to being bopped. And lastly, rogues had Feign Death. This originally wasn't a hunter ability, it was a rogue ability. Rogues did however need the reagent called Death Capsule to cast Feign Death. Let's move on to the Druids. Druids had a few changes on the alpha, but it's mostly towards feral druids. Let's first go over the non-feral abilities. Nullify Poison. The target is immune to poison for 45 seconds and is cured of all current poisons. Holy shit, this is quite strong. And to think it was probably planned to go up to 1 minute for max level is crazy. Abolish Magic. Abolishes all magic on the friendly target and prevents any magic from affecting the target for 5 seconds. This is a little weird. It affects buffs as well as debuffs, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Fury. The druid's attack speed is increased by 20% for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Honestly, this is quite a nice damage cooldown for cat form. Man Tracking. Shows humanoids on the minimap for 1 minute while in cat form. Pretty simple. Battle Roar. This is basically the same as Battle Shout. Honestly, I have no clue why they didn't keep it in for feral druids. Surprise Attack was basically the same as Pounce. Cat form also had a spell called Disembowel, which was pretty much the same as Rake, but just a much more gruesome name. Play Dead. This is the feral druid's Feign Death, because as we know, cats are very similar to rogues, and Rogue had Feign Death. Druids also did need to use a Death Capsule to use this ability as well. And lastly we have Bear Hug. Costs 50 rage and while channeling immobilizes the enemy and the druid for 30 seconds. This does not have a cooldown, so as long as you could gain rage, you could spam this ability. Let's move on to the priest abilities. Firstly, I want to note that Greater Heal and Prayer of Healing had a massive 4-second cast timer. This does kind of help to explain why Priest had so many different variants of healing spells like Heal, Lesser Heal, Greater Heal, etc. They were probably aiming to have a system where you kind of chose between the spells depending on the situation and the size or speed of the heal needed even at max level. But I guess they just ended up lowering the cast timers and leaving some of the spells like the regular heal too low level. I could also be talking absolute shit here because I have never been a healer, maybe you guys could fill me in on if that's the case. Anyway, Renew also had a cast timer of 2 seconds, Priest just like Mage had access to the sleep spell, and they had a spell called Holy Protection, increasing the holy resistances just like the Shadow Protection spell. Power Word Fumble. reduces the target's chance to hit by 75%. This is very similar to the Hunter's blinding shot and would have been extremely powerful for both PvE and PvP. Shadow Ward Befuddle. This is similar to Curse of Tongues, slowing the target's casting speed of spells. I'm not sure how much it slows the speed by, assuming it's probably similar to Curse of Tongues at around 50%. And lastly we have the Warlock. First up, Warlocks had Holy Ward, which absorbs holy damage. By now you're probably seeing a pattern. There was a ton of focus around holy damage, holy resistances, holy absorption, etc. What actually caused all that to change, I'm not totally sure. Maybe it was too overpowered against Paladins in PvP, maybe it's because they realised that no high level dungeons and raids really had any holy damage, who knows. Hellfire had a drastic change. Back on the alpha, it isn't a channeled spell but rather a 3-second cast time for a 10-second persistent buff. This would have actually been great for Warlock AoE because as we know, Warlock's AoE wasn't any good until TBC. This way they could have combined the Hellfire effect with Rain of Fire for probably pretty good AoE. Talking about Rain of Fire, it did however have a 3-second cast time and still needed to be channeled as well. Summon Nightmare. The Warlock mount used to be called Nightmare, and because it was a summon, it took a full 10 seconds to summon the Warlock mount. I mean, I guess it was still a free mount. Banish was also quite a bit different. You were able to cast it on any mob and you were able to banish multiple targets at a time, but each cast did require a soul shard. Underwater breathing was called Demon Breath, and health stones were called Bloodstones. Honestly, a little downgrade in the name department there. I quite like the old names. Now, there were a few more changes from some of the classes that we didn't really go into because there were minor name changes like Demon Breath. But I honestly wish that some of these old abilities made it into the release of the game, because of course some of them were absolutely broken and would have needed balancing. But some of them were pretty cool, and I hope when the day comes for Classic Plus that a lot of these are potentially looked at for inspiration. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know which of these abilities you thought were cool and should have made it into the game during vanilla. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed.